Greetings and happy Victoria Day or National Patriots Day if you happen to be one of our 23 listeners in Quebec, you miserable accursed. I'm David Herle with the full send, as the kids say, of our political panel. Kory Teneycke, Scott Reid, and Jordan Leichnitz. We'll get right on it today because naturally rums and cokes are out there begging to be consumed by me sooner rather than later. The Prime Minister has dusted off his boxing gloves and looks to be in fighting shape. Lots of aggressiveness at Newsers all last week. We'll talk about his shift in tone. Our cursed clipping comes from Ian Bailey at the Globe and Mail. Pierre Poilievre's conspicuous non-position on hybrid work for federal public servants and for a bunch of other things. Then it's the merger momentum gathering around BC United and BC Conservatives. We can't stop talking about BC. It's so damned exciting. We'll break that down. And finally, the perfectly Canadian timbre of Gordon Pinsent closes the show this Victoria Day with our Hey Yous. Jordan, Scott, Kory, you guys having a good long weekend?
Having a great long weekend.
I'm hanging out the Four Seasons in Toronto because the renovations are getting to be a little much. So,
right.
Yeah.
The Super 8 was booked.
The Super 8 was full, so we had to settle for the Four Seasons. And Nicole just got back from Singapore last night, so we're fighting a bunch of jet lag.
Well, Jason Isbell has a song called "I Don't Want to Die in a Super 8 Motel." That's how I always feel.
Just about to quote that.
I feel like there's very little danger of Kory dying in a Super 8 motel.
if Dateline NBC has taught me anything, that's where you go. That's where it happens.
Scott, you opening up the cottage this weekend?
Yep. We'll be putting early Monday morning. We're putting the docks and the water in, and we'll cut the 19-foot tall grass and play some euchre, drink some rum.
Euchre.
That sounds like
very wholesome.
Euchre is what goes down at the cottage, and as my cousin Jim and I like to say, we're the best on North Shore. They call us the superiors. Do
you cheat when you play euchre? Do you guys have little signs that you give each other for
we're just
bidding?
so fucking good that people accuse us of cheating, but it's because it's 35 years of psychic connection.
Yeah. Okay.
I've never played it. I don't know the rules. Nobody's ever even asked me to play the game, and not even sure I would know the word if Scott hadn't for his whole life been talking about being euchred.
Well,
euchre.
I guess we're all going to your place, Herle, and we're going to teach you how to play euchre because that's a big omission.
It's
one of my pet peeves in life is when people say, "Can you teach me to play euchre?" It's like, can I teach you to be funny? No, I can't. Okay, fuck off. If you don't know it, I don't want to know you. Okay, I can't teach somebody to play euchre. Children, yes, I will indulge that. I've taught all my children to play euchre. But adults would be like, could I play? Is it like bridge? It's just like bridge, right? It's like dumb bridge. When people say it's like dumb bridge, I literally want to knock their head off.
Well, I just said that, so
there you go.
Let's throw it down.
There's going to be a lot of blood across the walls of the.
I thought whist was dumb bridge.
Whist isn't a fucking game. Euchre is a game. Euchre is a proper British card game.
Yeah, no one who lived in a castle played it. So they were playing bridge.
Well, it didn't come over from the old country with the Hurleys and Feegers. All right, let's get to it. Trudeau's out there throwing punches everywhere. They've dropped all pretense of only positive campaigning, which, by the way, makes the lack of an accompanying ad campaign even more inexplicable. Anyway, this week the PM was in New Brunswick and was using Higgs as a punching bag on abortion. Higgs is a real social conservative, by the way, and that's no surprise from that province. So is Frank McKenna. So what do I think? I think the approach is correct. I think they need to pick some fights with people, as I've been saying, and I think that they need to turn the election, obviously, into a choice of things rather than a referendum on Trudeau. And the conservative provinces give the Liberals an illustration of conservatism in action, so I think it's the right thing to do. I think the issue is a good one. It always works. And the U.S. stuff gives it more salience, in my view. So, Scott, let's talk about Trudeau on the offensive and on this issue generally. What do you think?
I think they have almost no choice because they're not advertising. And so A, they can't break 301 unless they use the prime minister. B, they have to get something that tracks on Poilievre. They've got to slow him down. They've got to force him to talk. And I know we're going to discuss this later. They got to force him to talk about an issue that he doesn't want to talk about. So I understand why they're doing it. I'll still say this. I think it's a structure, not a strategy. I think if you look at this past week, and I'm going to isolate the abortion issue, but if you look at the week overall, like one day he's talking about childcare, another day he's talking about auto plants, another day he's talking about abortion, another day he's talking about buying a bridge in Quebec, right? So none of that holds together. None of that is stitched together or laddered up into some kind of meta narrative where you kind of go, oh, I can see how these pieces pull together, and it's an offering on a vision of government or a response to the public's priorities that contrasts with it. Like none of that is made. So it's just, you've got that. Then what you've got is all those issues are actually just used as, like a bumper pad to go on the attack in the Q&A on Poilievre. But even that's disjointed. Like it's a sort of slightly different kind of attack on him day by day. And you've got the prime minister surrounded by caucus and cabinet all the time. So what you have is a structure. We're going to do an issue a day. We're going to go on the attack in the Q&A, and we're going to surround you with a bunch of people. And so but that's not a strategy, right? And that's what's frustrating me is when I watch this, we've talked about this before. It feels to me like this is a plane flying without radar. It feels to me like there's no research. It feels to me like this is, we don't have any money for ads, or we don't choose to do ads. So we'll just use the prime minister. We got to get traction. So we'll just kind of throw out a bunch of stuff. And it doesn't feel like it's driven by research where it's like, well, what people really need to hear about us and what we're about is X. And what they really need to hear about him is Y. And they don't have a wound on Poilievre that they pick at day after day, that they stick their thumb in and twist and press and press. Like, so there's no sustained pressure, and there's no meta narrative coming out of it, which sounds like a goofy thing to meta narrative bullshit talk, but there's no fucking story. There's no, what is it? Like, what is, so it's all just smoke and water. It just drifts away. That's my concern. So yeah, I think they have to do things like this, but I wish it was more informed, more concentrated, and more persistent. Abortion is a little different because I do think there's a unique strategy. We know it works. But it doesn't feel like they're doing it as a matter of broad strategy. That
like it's true, David.
It is true.
Well, it isn't. It isn't. How well did it work in 2018? Just remind me. Remind me how well it worked in 2018. Because you ran a bunch of abortion ads on Doug Ford, but I also sat through the focus groups looking at those ads, and more people thought that Doug Ford had driven a girl or two to an abortion clinic than that those ads were true. Like, it doesn't always work.
It doesn't always work.
You need some credibility, like, underlying that it needs to seem possible, I think.
That's why I do think we're bathed in U.S. media. And so I do think that there's a context for this, and it might play in.
Well, I think that Justin Trudeau should change his citizenship and see if he can change the Constitution and
Wait,
go
Kory,
run
before
the
you go down this road,
States.
It worked against Harper. Wait a second, just in all honesty, it worked against Harper. 2 elections in a row, it worked against Harper. And it worked like a dam for Trudeau against Scheer in 2019. When people believe it's possible.
All right, well, what is the difference, David? Like, because I don't think I should have to draw a map for you guys on this. When you're ambiguous about what your position is on abortion, then that can work. Or if you actually are personally a social conservative who wants to, believes that you should restrict abortion, it works. This is the first openly pro-choice leader of the Conservative Party in a long fucking time, if not ever. So I don't know. Good luck with that. Good luck with that.
That's a fair rebuttal, but I wouldn't underestimate the power of the issue. I wouldn't underestimate its context. I don't think it gets the Liberals off the map, but I think it's something that could actually get some conservatives out talking. And maybe you fish a foolish answer from a foolish MP.
Okay, well, how about I throw out another theory that this looks like desperation. I don't think it's going to work. I think it's off target. What people are concerned about is not, people are not running around saying, "Oh my God, somebody is going to regulate my uterus," and this is the greatest problem in the land. They're saying it's a fucking affordability crisis, and they're worried about how they're going to pay for their mortgage and buy their groceries and all those things. And you've got the prime minister out there trying to change the topic and trying to change the country he's running in, and on and on and on. I think it's not going to work. And I'll base that on the fact that this isn't the first time they've tried this, and it isn't working. So when we say it always works, I would say, history would say otherwise.
It's certainly a familiar song.
And it certainly isn't working right now. Anyway, desperation. My name is Trudeau.
Yeah, I mean,
Jordan, I want to say, I want to preface your remarks by saying that one of the things I enjoy about this is the way conservatives react to this issue. So every conservative-leaning columnist or opinion maker in the country is up in arms that the Liberals have chosen to talk about this. It's outrageous that they've chosen to talk about this. And my friend Steve McGannity has an old saying, throw a stick into a pack of dogs, the one that howls is the one you hit. And I think that the fact that the conservatives hate this fucking issue so much tells me it remains a good issue for us.
Yeah, for sure. And I got to say, the New Democrats roll their eyes into the back of their heads when they fucking see the Liberals trot out with this issue. Because, let's talk about fair weather friends on the issue of choice in Canada. There's a long history there, of course. But look, I think I think for Trudeau this week, it's clear that there's been a sense, or some decision has been taken somewhere, that some strong action is needed. I agree with you that it seems to me to be disconnected to a larger strategy. And I fear for him that it confuses a little bit frantic energy with momentum, because they're not quite the same thing. And it really felt, and I'm going to maybe pick up a different example. I was struck by the exchange around climate change. So he was asked about climate change, and he went on at great length educating the reporters about the virtues of the carbon tax for a good solid 5-minute soliloquy before pivoting to say that Poilievre wants to let the country burn and let Canadians suffer. And look, I think that it's very true that we do have a climate crisis, and there's no real substantive debate about that happening and about what we might do about it. But he's continuing to double down on the carbon tax, which I think it's just a political dead end at this point. And it's difficult to see him using that argument, and particularly when he's making a claim like that, it's not really, I don't think most voters are going to see that as credible. You can doubt what Pierre Poilievre is going to do about the climate crisis. And in fact, there really hasn't been a sustained discussion about what his approach will be. He's managed to slip the noose on that conversation many times. And that is something that's a fight that the Liberals do have to take to him. But the sort of wild accusations, and, I don't actually think it's ultimately helpful, because people tune out.
But wait a second, Jordan. Look at what Poilievre's out there saying about them. You want to talk about wild accusations? He's accusing them of killing people.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think this goes back to the question of, what do you want your principal out there saying, right? So Trudeau is the one delivering these messages. He's the one with the credibility problem with voters in general. And he's delivering these messages also on a policy that is his least favorable policy. So he's still stuck debating and discussing on the least favorable terrain for him. This is not going to be a place where he's going to lift off an attack on his opponent that's going to stick with people. But he seems unable to steer out of that particular cul-de-sac. So I'm not sure how successful this is going to be. I mean, I think it's notable that there's been some energy to try something different, but it doesn't seem to me to be coordinated with the same strategy that we saw, for example, leading up to the budget, where they chose a theme, they chose housing, they hammered away on it, they picked something that was their favorable terrain, or that they were trying to regain from the Conservatives, and that there was a viable path on, and they hammered on it. And this is not that level of discipline. But it is, to me, it does look a little bit desperate on the part of the Prime Minister. And I'm not sure that that's actually going to land very well.
They are desperate.
Sure. That makes sense to me.
They are desperate. And I assume, you three, whoever wants to pick this up, that the issue set that we're talking about that Trudeau was on this week means that their capital gains wedge has fizzled on them. because they've moved on from it. Now, I guess it could come back with the vote.
I think they're going to wait for the vote. I think that's the next front on that one.
They're going to wait. They're going to wait for Poilievre to vote for it, because that's the obvious way to disarm that particular issue.
Right.
And they set it up. It's kind of like the federal scab worker legislation. It's like, when you try to do those things, isolate an issue and make people vote on it. Well, you better hope that they're going to vote the way you want.
Well, this was always a challenge.
And they don't have to.
Yeah. Like they made something relatively modest, the litmus test on this. So if the bar is too easy for him to get over, then that's on them.
Last week, I said you can tell a lot about what a company values by where they make their capital expenditure investments. Apropos of that, this week we're going to spend some quality time on a Canadian farm. Makes the Herle heart swell just a little. Our presenting sponsor's agricultural division is the aptly named TELUS Ag. They've made Canadian farming a priority investment for years now. Newly seeded, an initiative called TELUS Connected Worker Solutions, which improves farm worker safety. Farms can be vast, far-flung places. My family worked a 640-acre wheat farm outside of Prelate, Saskatchewan. Threshers and combines were an ongoing and potentially dangerous reality. TELUS has developed real-time technology that monitors workers in the field, their precise location and activities, alone or on a team, and connects them instantly to emergency services. TELUS Ag has also launched a suite of services to help with the growth and well-being of livestock. Online animal record management made easier and more efficient. Daily data collection, real-time access to health information, and customizable reports to optimize the health of cattle. Precision strategies for nutrition, built by the TELUS Calf Grower Feeding Program, plus other tools that improve the well-being of the herd and maximize economic potential. Hurly-burlyites, these are the investments TELUS makes in how we live and learn, work, more easily access our health care, and thrive. The human outcomes. They want to keep making them. So here's the crux. Regulatory conditions play a big part in what they can get done. As the government considers a new wholesale regime, TELUS believes that the way forward is a tailored approach that recognizes different regional truths. Farms are not the city. Investments cost more in remote areas. The competitive landscape in all markets is not the same. More on all of this next week. Scott, Jordan raised the whole thing about Trudeau being the messenger, and so did you. Normally we're against this, right? Having the leader do your negative stuff. But the truth of the matter is Trudeau's popularity is gone. Like his likability quotient is gone anyway, right? And he's their best puncher. So he's not Ollie 1965. He's Ollie 1975. He's now a slugger. That's what he's got.
Yeah, I'm worried he's Ollie 1979. But yeah, I agree with you. And, when I hear, desperate, okay, yes, they are desperate. Desperate doesn't necessarily mean wrong. You can be desperate. You can be motivated by desperation on an issue and still tap some oil. And I agree with you at this point, since they've decided, or whatever it is, since they're not going to advertise and they're not going to carry the fight in another way, they don't have a choice but to drain the well on Trudeau and have him go on the attack, because it's
they have a choice. He could step down. They could have a leadership race.
Well, that may happen, but
that's
we'll see.
Obvious.
I just don't think I don't think that they have a practical option available to them until they decide something earth changing like that. I go back to it though. Even if you accept, all right, fine, we'll take on the mantle of looking desperate. Even if you take on the mantle of having Trudeau be the fighter, all that's really coming through right now is that Trudeau's fighting, because he fought about 6 things in 5 days, and that doesn't get you anywhere. So again, I come back to this point. It's structure versus strategy. They've got a structure. He's going to go out there and punch. He's going to go out there and try to say something about Poilievre. He's going to use whatever they're talking about that day just to get it in front of a microphone. It's almost meaningless what the day's announcement is, because they don't try to even milk it for any kind of overall, this is our vision versus their vision, other than in the most bumper stickery bromide fashion, which is counterproductive because it's so lathered in our policies are virtuous and we understand. But they've got to fight for 4 or 5 days on a thing. They have to find a thing. Like how many times? So like you can't be in a position where the leader, the prime minister, is dictating that, right? Because he'll go through from a place of emotion and he'll pick up the catnip on the climate change question and talk for 8 minutes and be fierce and defensive about it. Like how many times we would be on the bus with Paul and we'd be saying, we've got to go on healthcare. And he'd be like, I'm sick and tired of talking about fucking healthcare. Everyone says I look desperate, it's pathetic, and it's not a real issue. And be like, you've got to talk about healthcare. Here's what we want you to say on healthcare. Here's what the fight you want to focus on. You must persist day after day after day. And otherwise, it doesn't register. It has no chance of registering. And there's no persistence to the focus of their attack. It's just blah, 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 negative. And so that's got to change. There's no strategy here. There's just a structure.
What do you guys think? Do you think this climate change thing, this carbon tax decision of theirs, to continue to have it and to continue to defend it the way they are defending it in the wake of its obvious political impact? I mean, we've even seen it its impact in provincial politics in British Columbia, for God's sake. So this is a big goddamn thing. They've decided to stick with it. Is there any way this is a political strategy, or is this like some sort of moral or ethical position on his part? I'm kind of reminded, I shouldn't be because I don't like to compare him to his father, but in the 1979 election, 1979 election, the Liberals were behind. And the one thing that it was the middle of a recession, economy was bad. The one thing that nobody in Canada gave a flying fuck about was the Constitution, except Pierre Trudeau cared about the Constitution. And he campaigned on patriating the Constitution right through the 1979 election. And it is obvious that Jim Coots and Keith Davey would have been telling him, and Martin Goldfarb, that is not what was working. But he, I think, had decided he was losing, and he was going to go out on the thing he cared about. And he was going to go out with a legacy talking about what he cared about. Do you think that's what Trudeau's doing with climate? That he's decided, I'm going to lose, so I'm going to have a legacy of that I didn't back down on, or what?
I think it's worse than that. I think it's worse than that. I think that he thinks that he's right, and he still thinks he can win on this issue, because if that weren't the case,
they all do. They always do.
Yeah, He just has to explain this in the right way to enough people personally, and then they're going to understand. And look, I understand the instinct, but I think it's worse than just damaging for the Liberals, because if that were the case, then I would wish them very well in the journey. But I think that it's actually preventing a more serious conversation about what are the policy solutions that are politically viable for climate action in Canada. Like, the whole conversation is now stuck and quagmired on the issue of the carbon tax. And that's because Trudeau has really confused the idea of having the carbon tax as like taking action on climate change, and that this is the only path to do that. And like, his comments exemplified this, right? And I think this is actually very frustrating for a lot of people who are working in the field, because they see that this is a political dead end. And the reality is that as things stand, it's going to be gone anyways. It's going to be gone because Pierre Poilievre is going to be prime minister, and he is going to zap it into space on day one. So instead of having a conversation,
environmental committee's already moved on.
Well, that's it. Instead of having a conversation about the myriad of ways you could mix measures to get to those targets that we need to hit, we're having a conversation about a policy that's effectively DOA. And it doesn't make sense from a policy perspective. It makes no sense from a political perspective. So that only leaves the fact that the prime minister is doing this because he is personally attached to the issue. He thinks he's right, and he's dead set on explaining his way through that to as many people as possible. But short of getting every Canadian in his living room to do that, I don't see how this is a viable strategy. And I actually think,
although they should try that.
Well, yeah, I mean,
get at it right now.
That's it. This is going to be really make the barbecue circuit interesting this summer. But look, like, you're every time he does this, he's fighting on ground that all of the research is telling everyone is favorable to his opponent. Like, it is not terrain that he has shown himself capable of winning, even when he is explaining it. So it's like an anchor that's holding them down from being able to break away from some of this stuff. So I think it's a really unfortunate choice. And I think in the end, actually, it may be the thing that prevents him from being able to do what he needs to do, which is to take a bit of a turn from what his government has been doing. He needs to articulate some difference. Like, why vote for me again? What am I going to do differently because you are all unhappy with what I am doing? And so it's really difficult to paint that picture when he's hugging the number one negative item that his opponent is out there slamming away at him on.
For those not watching on YouTube, Jordan put Scott into the fetal position for a minute or two there. Kory, you said he's stubborn.
He's stubborn. He's look. I've never seen a politician more quick to apologize for something that somebody else did 100 years ago, and so absolutely incapable of self-reflection and honesty about how things are going that he's doing. Like, he can, infuriate everybody by, going on a lavish vacation on somebody else's expense during an affordability crisis. And, there's no apology for that. When that's clearly, a mistake, every liberal I've spoken to would say that was a mistake. Every liberal I've spoken to would say that's something he should have shown some contrition for, but he's incapable of doing it. I just think this guy.
It's a culture of the whole organization, eh? Like, to say that somebody made a mistake inside that world is a career-limiting move.
Yeah, well, and yet mistakes are made, and
and careers are going to be limited.
Yeah, but I very much agree with everything that Jordan said around carbon tax. Like, this is a millstone. I love your line, David, that if the carbon tax is so great and it's returning so much money to people's pockets, why don't they double it? Right? Like, it's just such a laughably fucking absurd proposition that they're out there selling. Like,
Kory,
does anyone in the entire fucking country believe that the carbon tax leaves people with more money in their pocket? Is there a single
Not Tim
voter?
Houston, because I put it to him and he laughed in my face.
I know he laughed in your face because it's laughable. Like, it is laughable. Like, and good on you for being a good liberal and putting the line to him straight. But like, I gotta say, nobody buys it. Nobody buys it, and I feel like maybe there's nobody in the organization who can sit Trudeau down and show him a poll and have a conversation with him about how untenable this line and this issue is for him. And it's and you can't even point to carbon reductions with it. Like it is bullshit from A to fucking Z, and they have decided this is the thing they want to fight on. Like, I would say the only hope they have is for Trudeau to resign and have somebody else who can do the obvious things. Like, Scott pointed out a bunch of obvious things, like you can't change the attack every morning and have that work. You got to pick one thing. Jordan pointed out an obvious thing. You can't fight on the carbon tax. Nobody's buying it. Like, there are a bunch of things, low-hanging fruit, things that are laying on the floor there for whoever comes and takes over from Trudeau to do. Because he's clearly unwilling to do the most obvious things to improve his fortunes.
Yeah. Safety is one of those subjects that tends not to excite, principally because success involves things not happening. But just about nothing is more important. Our sponsor, CN, runs a network that spans North America, from the east coast of Canada to the Pacific, and down the Mississippi to the Gulf Coast. Its tracks and trains run through thousands of communities, and the duty of rolling safely and smoothly through those cities and towns is absolute. Early in June, during Safety Week, special CN trains will make a series of whistle stops across the railway's network. Teams of safety experts will meet local leaders, talk safety, celebrate employees who have logged 30 injury-free years, recognize heroic acts, and simply and plainly explain how to prevent injuries, accidents, and disasters. Hint, if you see a train coming, for heaven's sake, stay off the tracks. And CN is putting serious muscle into disaster relief. Earlier this month, the railway announced a pledge of $10 million over 10 years across its network. Climate change has brought increasingly extreme weather in recent years. Wildfire season is well underway. Count on seeing forest fire smoke again over major cities this year. So apart from its extensive efforts to prevent and contain fires, and I'll have more on that as the summer progresses, the railway is setting aside money for emergency response, community rebuilding, and infrastructure rehabilitation. The world is changing, folks. We have to adapt. That will cost money, and CN is stepping up. So he is likely to resign, by the way, Kory, right? Because he's 20 points down, and he's not doing anything that will get him away from being 20 points down or 15 points down. And people don't run when they're 15 or 20 points down. So he's eventually going to quit. It's just a question of when. Scott, do you want to wrap up this section?
Yeah, I agree strongly with that last point. And I didn't used to a year ago, but I've come to that conclusion that that's how this plays out. There's no visible evidence that any of the things that they are doing, or even that they try to claim and brief people on that they're doing. So they're self-stated activities and strategies and approaches that they're going to move that needle whatsoever. So whether it's at the end of the summer or whether it's at Christmas time, I think eventually, if these numbers stay the same, you got to assume that he's going to move. I know that in 2025, one thing for sure will happen, and that's April 1st. And I know that that means that this issue is guaranteed to stay center stage and come back again with just all the fucking sound and fury that it did this past April 1st, and that is no good. So to me,
except in Atlantic, Canada, where it's the last year of their holiday.
Yeah. And they've managed to find a way to make the issue nice and center there. I've actually thought a lot about your question, like just about the 1979 comparison, the gunslinger campaign. I've thought about that myself. And I don't think that the psychology is, if we're going down, I'm going to go down fighting for what I believe in, because I don't think they've gotten their gut around going down. I think they're still thinking that defending this and fighting for this and making the good fight and be seen to be making the good fight is part of the way back. And
that's too stupid for words.
That is too stupid for words, but I believe that it's true. At least emotionally, it must be true for the prime minister, and he can't separate himself. So the last way I would wrap this up is, I don't think that anybody in the party is going to organize to push out Trudeau. I don't think you're going to see that happen. I don't think anybody in his cabinet caucus is going to call for him to step down and that kind of stuff. You're going to hear people are anxious, and you'll hear that kind of stuff. But what I do think will be interesting is whether you start to hear people edge into the harbor of saying things like, there's more than one way to combat climate change. It doesn't just have to be with the carbon tax. We could look at cap and trade. We could ask people to, recycle their bottles. Like, I just wonder if you're going to hear that happen between now and say the end of the calendar year, because I do think that being attached to this fucking anchor is wearing on people.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to the other side of the aisle. Let's throw some punches at Pierre Poilievre if we can. Let's see what's going on here. So, our clipping this week is from Ian Bailey in the Globe and Mail. By the way, I like Ian Bailey. I think he's a solid reporter.
Yeah. Such a nice, soft-spoken guy. You got to be careful. Yeah. Those soft-spoken guys can sneak up on you.
No, you think they're nice, and then they fuck you. That's right.
He's not mean, though. I'm not. He is.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is declining to take a definitive position on the federal government moving to have public servants work a minimum 3 days a week in their offices, up from 2 days. Mr. Poilievre was asked about the issue on Thursday during a news conference in Vancouver and did not directly clarify where he stood on the matter. Later, Sebastian Skamsky, the media relations director for Mr. Poilievre's office, only said the opposition leader's remarks stand. In an interview, Mr. Skamsky did not say if Mr. Poilievre supports the idea of 3 days or confirms some other figure. So, on that issue, we had a discussion about that on this show a couple of weeks ago. We thought the politics could not be simpler of that issue. But it's not the only thing Poilievre doesn't have a position on. I don't know what he thinks about the EV battery plants. I don't know what he thinks about the capital gains tax increase. I don't know what he thinks about the federal regulated industry scab legislation. And I don't know what he thinks about the industrial carbon tax. And that's just a list off the top of my head. So, Jordan, it's not as though Poilievre has no positions on things. Sometimes he's very anxious to have clear ground, like on the notwithstanding clause and making sure that accused have fewer rights than they currently do. What is with his strategy of ambiguity on these kinds of issues?
Yes, I don't think a shortage of opinions is the problem here. But yeah, I mean, look, I think this is a pretty smart front-runner strategy for a couple of reasons. So the first being that these are all potential traps for him that could divide his desired vote coalition in one way or the other. And so if he were to pronounce on one side or the other of this, particularly ahead of a moment in which he might need to, so like just as an example, the capital gains tax, there's no real reason for him to do that today. He'll need to take a position at some point around the vote. But, the longer of a lead time you have out with a position like that that's divisive among your own potential universe, the more fire you take, right? So he's making why shrink that universe who's looking at you on some of these issues that are a little bit more potentially hot button. And also that can be turned against you by your opponents, right? Like a lot of these are issues that are traps that have been laid for him. And I think that this is a way for him to stay on his message, right? Like every day he's talking about capital gains is a day that he's not talking about carbon tax. And so that's not desirable for him and his team. And so they're exercising, I think, generally speaking, very impressive message discipline in terms of staying on the issues that are favorable to them. It should get harder. Hopefully it will get harder for him to do that as time goes on, because as we get into a situation where he is the presumed incoming government, people do want to know a little bit more about what his plans are on these issues. And, and I think I gave the example earlier about figuring out exactly what is his plan on climate change. And I think those conversations will heat up, pun intended, very much over the summer. But this is also the job of the other parties, right? Like, so the Liberals and the NDP need to be kind of taking that fight to him and putting pressure on getting ways to force him into positions on this. And that's why I actually think, the splitting off the capital gains vote, that's a fine tactic. Like things like that are actually that's smart. Like you need to actually carve out these moments where he has to declare himself one way or the other without any cover on the issue if you want to derive any benefit from those wedges and those traps that you're putting out there. So they need to find more ways to do that and get him to pronounce himself. Well, there's still lead time to use that vulnerability against him, where you can still point out to people that, he's taking positions that they may view as unfavorable.
Wealthsimple was founded a decade ago, offering tools for long-term, low-fee investing. Over time, they've added so much more than that, including Wealthsimple Cash, Canada's highest interest checking account. It features no monthly fees or minimum balances, and up to $500,000 in CDIC coverage on eligible deposits. How do they do it? Wealthsimple is a regulated securities dealer, not a bank. They hold cash deposits in trust with regulated Schedule I banks to provide enhanced CDIC coverage and competitive interest rates to their clients. Competition is declining in Canada, driving up costs for financial services. Wealthsimple is changing that because they believe everyday spending and saving can and must remain affordable. Wealthsimple clients have accrued over $100 million in interest in the last year alone. That's the power of competition in action, and it's just another reason Wealthsimple is trusted by over 3 million Canadians. Wealthsimple has been proud to sponsor The Curse of Politics over the last 10 weeks. Thanks for listening, and have a great summer. Kory, the head of the Oil Sands Pathways Alliance, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Laid a pretty heavy shot across the bow on Poilievre toward the end of the week when he talked about lack of clarity around future climate policy and how climate policy was integral to being part of the global economic system. And obviously they want to do a big carbon capture and storage play out there in the oil sands. But anyway, what? The campaigns that I was involved in, we were always so worried about stakeholder opinion that we would have been in a kerfuffle in a campaign that I was about how do we respond to this guy and how do we take this on and diffuse this problem. But I don't think the Poilievre people give a shit about the Pathways Alliance and what they say, and I don't think they feel they have to respond to it, do they?
Well, I don't think they feel like they have to respond to it, and I think you saw some of the views that Poilievre has around industry associations and others that are kissing the ass of the Liberal government in a range of areas, including this one. He thinks that they are not acting in the interest of their shareholders or the industry or workers in Alberta. And I think it's a pretty good case to be made that's the truth. So, like, look, I think this is just smart politics. Like, I don't think there's a big downside in taking a position on how many days of work public servants go to the office federally, but I think it's largely irrelevant for everyone that isn't in the Greater Ottawa area. Like, I think it's an irrelevant issue for most people, and to talk about that irrelevant issue, you've got to stop talking about something that is relevant. Like carbon tax, which we were speaking about earlier. So message discipline is about, what you choose to talk about, what you choose to respond to. And I just think it's smart politics to leave these little issues, at the side and focus on the big stuff. And, and sometimes, there'll be an opportunity to do something counterintuitive, which might expand your voter universe a little bit. But you do those things and then you move right back to what is actually driving voter behavior right now, and that's everything around affordability. So I don't know. Like, I don't find it a mystery. I know that there are people out there saying if he doesn't talk about this or that, then he's not a real conservative, in quotes, on and on. So much fucking bullshit. I just gotta say. Stick with what wins. Trust your own polling. Focus on the issues that are motivating public opinion, and don't get into the weeds on all the things that interest groups or pundits or pointy-headed people in the policy community want you to talk about. Fuck all those guys.
And Scott, when there's a wave going, a lot of the other shit doesn't matter. Like, I would bet you right now that the Liberal candidate in St. Thomas could campaign day and night about Poilievre's lack of commitment to the EV battery plants and still get fucking smoked in that riding.
Yeah. And that is, and we'll have no luck ever convincing that local candidate that that's true. But it is true. By the way, I just like how Kory, the note that Kory ended, like, fuck all those guys. I think that's the working title of the Conservative platform, actually. Right. It's let's bring it home and then we'll fuck all those guys. Who's with me? I think 3 or 4 things about this. One, I think that, in the broadest possible terms, it is dispiriting that you can run a campaign to be prime minister at such an indisputably successful clip, and share so fucking little of what you intend to do. So that's, in theory, in broad strokes, in abstract, that's dispiriting, and it says something. We're not here to opine on state of democracies, I guess, but it's dispiriting. 2, I think that they are showing remarkable discipline. I think they are discipline, but I think there's 2 things motivating their discipline. One is discipline. One is a sense of message discipline, traditional campaign discipline. What's smart, what's not smart, right? The other is a little bit of hubris and arrogance and even like the chip on the shoulder thing of, it's not smart for us to respond to these people. It's fuck those guys, right? Fuck all those guys. So there's a little bit of that kind of like, we not only do we not need to respond to these people, we revel in not responding to them. We'd like the opportunity to stop, bend over and rub their noses in shit and tell them and remind them that they do not matter and they cannot stop me. And I'm going to run the ball up the middle and you can't do a fucking thing about it.
Okay. But like, let's just be honest about what we're talking about here. Cause like most of these things that we're talking about that he's, quote, not responding to are attacks from the Liberal Party. attacks from the government.
No,
So
okay.
he
Forget
wants to
all
say what
that.
he wants to do on
No,
abortion.
that's bullshit.
I don't think
I'm
I
not
buy
buying
that.
into
I don't buy that.
It is legitimate to ask what his climate policy is going to be if it's not going to be a carbon tax.
No. So what is the scab legislation that we talked about? Like what, so that was one of the things that was brought up. What is that? That is a fucking trap that was laid out by the government to try to engage them on. Like, so, and what is, we're just talking about abortion. The guy said he's
I thought Jordan told me that was legacy legislation that the NDP has been fighting for their...
deeply offended by Kory's lack of credit.
These things are just political traps. Politics as always, and it's like, I'm going to suck my thumb in the corner because Pierre Poilievre is not taking the bait on this, or he's not taking the bait on that, and I can't believe that you can run for prime minister and not take the bait on my political traps. Well,
okay. All right, we heard you. I'd like to finish my fucking point because I think I acknowledge that they're demonstrating discipline. That doesn't mean that it's all motivated solely by strategic smarts. I do think there's a personality issue there, which is I don't fucking wanna and I don't need to. And the worm will turn on that, and we'll see how that plays when he's prime minister. Third thing I would say is that the Liberals have to somehow try to make this. I think it's a reasonable thing to start pushing. You got time to say, why wouldn't he give you an answer on X, Y, and Z? What is he about? All that. But again, don't ask, tell. Like if he's being silent on something, you feel that silence. The only way you're ever going to break his discipline is if he comes to the rational conclusion that what the Liberals are saying he's going to do is getting enough traction that he has to correct the record or counter-inform. And then the last point I would make is I give almost zero chance to the likelihood that that will occur because of the saggy, sorry-ass place of this world, which is he actually doesn't. Like, what are the conditions that are going to create? The prime minister is going to hold a news conference and say, here's the 10 questions he won't answer that matter to you. The media will pick it up. They will put the questions to Poilievre. Poilievre will give a version of Kory's answer, which is, those are just liberal traps. You're all just being paid by the liberal government to ask questions. Suck my dick. And then nothing happens. Nothing happens. It doesn't resonate. It doesn't, because the role of earned media in terms of pushing public opinion and shaping public opinion is so diminished as compared to where it used to be.
Do you remember when
we got to change election?
Scott, do you remember when the Globe? Remember when the Globe ran a daily editorial demanding the Sheila Copps resign because of the GST, and it mattered?
Yeah.
Like what was the last Globe editorial you read?
The ROB has been filled.
Write editorials? Do they still write editorials? I don't know. I haven't seen one in about 10 years.
The ROB is filled daily.
Is it
positive spin on this if you're not a conservative? These are all also excellent opportunities to make clear what the stakes are for voters of a Poilievre government, right? If you're able to prosecute that case, there's goods here. There is actual material. And I think that what's lacking is the focus and then just the dollars behind that message to get it out.
Okay, I'm going to wheel on you. I'm going to wheel on you right now, Jordan Leichnitz. Right?
Do it.
I'm going to wheel on you because I read in the news in the last day that Jagmeet Singh has a new aggressive tone too, and he's got a snappy new slogan, which I can't remember. But in any event...
Rolex for all.
But not you, Kory, because it's each according to their need.
In any event, when the NDP, like Jagmeet Singh says, if you elect Poilievre, he's going to ruin this country. He's going to take away pharmacare and dentacare. Mm-hmm. Why the fuck are they talking about the two most recent things that happen, which are not even recognized by most Canadians, which are not a core part of Canada? Like, those are not the most compelling things, right? Like, those are not the attack lines. Just because you got him done out of this deal, that doesn't mean that that's the point of attack on fucking Poilievre, right? He's not going to lose because he'll take away pharmacare. He's not going to lose because of that.
Yeah, I think the stance is right. I think that you're right that the content could be filled out more. And the obvious thing there is that those are two examples, not just that the NDP forced out of the Liberals in the agreement, but also that Poilievre himself has not been declarative on, right? So I think they're trying to weave those threads together, but there's more there. Like, that's my point exactly, is that all of these are fair game. And in fact, when you pull at those threads, you can go deeper into issues of healthcare. You can go deeper into is the healthcare.
Totally. Poilievre laid out his vision of what the federal government's responsibilities are. Healthcare wasn't part of it.
That's right. You need to go on anti-scab, but you got to go further because that fucker's probably going to vote for anti-scab. So you need to pick a different litmus test. You need to go dig deep into the archives because Lord knows there's reams of material there. Like this guy was out wanting to make Canada the first right to work country. You know, like you don't even have to look very hard. So they need to go out, pick those threads up that are there around some of the current, like more in the forefront, and then make that deeper case about what's at stake. But here's what I will say is that the New Democrats are out there with like they have made that pivot and they are out there punching away on the gains that they have made. Like it is astounding to me that the government is not doing at all the same, right? Like the Liberals
Didn't we just discuss that they are, but everyone's just punching in the dark in a different direction in a room that's locked.
They're going off in different ways and they're not actually making a broader case about what is going to change in your life, what is going to be there for you or not be there for you under a Poilievre government. And like that is the case that has to be made.
Folks, I hate to say it like this, but it's all so goddamned hopeless. Unless you're Kory and Pierre Poilievre, it's hopeless. These arguments are not persuasive to Canadians. They are not being made persistently. They are not penetrating with voters, and they are insufficient to overcome the desire for change in the midst of a cost of living crisis after the government's been in office for nearly a decade. It's goddamn hopeless. So we're going to run this string out of different things. Most of them will be done poorly. Some will be done a little better. None of them are going to fucking make a difference. None of them are going to stick to the wall. And we're going to get to Christmas and we're only going to be talking about whether or not Trudeau's going to quit and when. I'm sorry to ruin the next 6 months of pods, but that is the goddamn truth of it all.
I know. We'll be back in 6 months, folks, to see if anything's different.
But there are
Me and the Silver Surfer are going to join Galactus and find another world to consume.
Look, it's not like there aren't things that the government or the NDP could do. They're just not doing them, right? And it's because they've just it's to our earlier conversation. They have decided to close doors that need to be opened. Like the argument on their principal measure on affordability is a fucking tax. Like just go and think about that for a minute. How insane that is. How absolutely insane that is. And if they stopped doing things that were that obviously fucking stupid, they would actually probably get some traction.
They might get back to 27.
Well, okay, or 18 in the case of the NDP, right? The NDP is, if they have any more victories like they've been having in this coalition agreement, they're going to cease to exist as a political party. That's how fucking bad they are. That's how bad they are. That's how bad they are.
Hey, let me bring one last thing up that interests me, you guys. Let me bring one last thing up that interests me. So this is a government that we would all agree doesn't have much credibility on the economy, is not seen as a government that's very focused on economic growth, is seen as a government that has overemphasized environment at the expense of economy. What is the most significant thing that this government did this year? By a mile. Trans Mountain Pipeline opened. Trans Mountain Pipeline opened. It's such a big deal. It makes a measurable impact on GDP all by itself, right? It, for the first time, means that Canadians get the full world price for oil as opposed to the discounted rate they had to get in Texas or Louisiana because we're going right to Tidewater ourselves, right? It's a big fucking deal. Do they talk about it at all? Have you heard anybody in the government mention that thing?
Why would you when you're number one, not going to get any credit for it in the provinces and regions where that's actually economically significant because nobody believes that you actually value this industry, and where it could also hurt you in Quebec, the last place that you have an ice cube's chance in hell. So I don't think it's a mystery why they're not talking about it. That's not why they say they're not talking about it. They won't answer the question, but if they were saying, they'd say, quote unquote, it's off brand. That's the problem. It's at odds with it's something they did, and it's a big dollar commitment and it's a big consequence, but it's off brand. They don't do this narrative stuff very well. Never have.
but they are good at brand. They believe in brand. I mean, the problem now, of course, is the
Surely
brand
if
is
you had an
tarnished.
economic story, this could be part of it. I'm not saying you would hold this up as the only thing you've done, but
I'm not
surely
defending the logic. I'm saying that's where they're at. They are pure brand, right? And so their view is that's at odds with their brand, and you're not going to hear a dick about it.
Yeah, I think that's bang
Fair
on,
enough.
Scott.
All right. Lastly, let's swing wildly to the West Coast as we've done for a couple of weeks in a row. Another week, more stuff going on in BC. If you're really interested in this stuff, check out the superb Hotel Pacifico with Mike McDonald and Jeff Meggs and Kate Harmer. A Conservative Party out there, re-energized by its association with the federal Conservatives, its opposition to the carbon tax, and a more familiar brand name, are looking like the new challengers to the NDP government. But now there's worry the BC United will cling to enough votes to split the anti-NDP vote and elect EB again. So behind the scenes, the brokers were trying to merge the two entities. They even had a new leader in mind, the mayor of New Westminster.
So awkward.
Oh man, I'm sorry. I'm gonna try to not laugh too much while you read this article.
Falcon of the United initially sounded sympathetic to cooperation. This isn't an article. This is me.
Okay.
Then Rustad burned the whole idea down in some long social media posts, and then Falcon responded by saying he couldn't merge with dinosaurs like the Conservatives. Kory, doesn't feel like this is over yet, and I'm not sure Falcon or Rustad are in the driver's seat of how this ends up.
There is not going to be a merger. Like there isn't a 1% chance of that. And you know, I'm not surprised that people in BC United would like the Conservative Party of BC more if it was just BC United, or if it was led by somebody, you know, who was like a federal liberal or what have you. You know, wouldn't it all be so much better if Gordon Campbell was in charge? You know, then I could really get behind those, you know, BC Conservatives. Or, you know, let's just find somebody else. Like let's debase the entire reason that the party is doing well in the polls and turn it into the party that people are walking away from and they don't want to vote for. Like the insanity. Like, look, I'm a fan of Hotel Pacifico, but with all due respect, you know, Mike McDonald and the folks who are pushing some sort of merger, it just sounds unplausible to me, and about trying to convert something that's working over here into something that isn't working over there. And I think in the part of the NDP, you know, they want to encourage all this kind of talk, but it's not the BC Conservatives are, you know, challenging the NDP. They're leading in the last 3 polls that I've seen. They're leading. They are winning. Right now, they are winning.
So let me just stick with you, Kory, for a second and put it a slightly different way, which is I don't think a merger will happen either. And the actual Mark Marison did some analysis online about what the polling says about that. And it looks like about half of BC United's remaining support are federal liberals who prefer EB to the Conservatives, and about half are Conservatives. So there'd be no consequential difference if BC United disappeared now. But I'm going to use an example.
Like it could be worse.
I'm going to use an example you might be familiar with. You'll be familiar with, definitely. Is Rustad Hermanson?
Yeah, it could be. Like,
I mean, the first guy who wasn't really ready for prime time and can't win.
Well, look, he could have won. Look, the story on Hermanson is that, you know, I remember that campaign well, like back in 2000, was it?
Yeah.
All the polling indicated there was only one issue that the Saskatchewan Party could lose the race on, and that was privatization of Crown corporations. And then he spent 45 minutes in a press conference talking about it. And guess what? The polling was right. The polling was correct. And so, you know, I don't believe it that there wasn't a way for Hermanson to win. I think there very clearly was. They just, and it was also very clear there was one way that you could lose, and that's the path they took. And lo and behold, look, I don't think any of this stuff is preordained. I think Rustad has some opportunities, and I think he's got some things he needs to be worried about. You know, point one is I would slow down my nominations. I would probably jettison some candidates that have already been nominated who are a little bit fringe. And those tough decisions are what makes you win or lose. It's what determines whether you're going to be Brad Wall or Elwyn Hermanson. And because you can see that train coming down the tracks from a mile away. That kooky candidates is probably the biggest pitfall for them going into a vote. If that's not on the table, I think they have a very good chance of being the next government. But anyway, we'll see what they decide to do. But the one thing they don't have to do is to find some liberal mayor or former liberal leader or hanger on or lobbyist or fucking whatever from BC United and put them in the window as the candidate. That is the surest way to lose. The surest way to lose.
Scott, 2015, the Liberal Party governed British Columbia. The Federal Liberal Party had half the seats in British Columbia. There hasn't been a fall this precipitous in a province for the Liberal Party since Saskatchewan in the 1970s, where they went from the government in 71 to no provincial seats in 78, and significant number of members of parliament to zero over that period of time. I mean, this is quite astonishing.
Yeah, no, it's a beating, and you look at it and you kind of go, well, maybe it cycles, man. Hopefully the pendulum will swing back if you're of that ilk, but. I think the merger thing is interesting in the sense that in the week that was, which wasn't that impressive politically, I think it might have been the most interesting and important political event just because I think it again shines a spotlight on the precarious position of Eby, who we didn't think was going to be anywhere near a precarious spot. Now, I do think that when you think about it, first of all, I don't think there will likely be I think there will be a merger in the same way that Tyson united the heavyweight championship belts, I think there'll be a merger in that Kevin Falcon will end up Michael Spinks laying on the canvas. But I joke, but I think that's where BC United is headed for. And so it's kind of like what you guys are kicking around. It's a question of can Rustad, despite historical precedent and all real kind of visible evidence about the range of his political skills, defy all those factors, not have kooky candidates that blow him up in the middle of a campaign, not give people enough reason to hesitate and to halt his own momentum and somehow hang on and pull this thing out a few months from now. And, I'd still probably bet marginally against it. But, when a stiff wind blows, you never know, right? So I don't think the Falcon merger, Gordon Campbell, I wouldn't go anywhere near that if I was Rustad. That's completely poison, I think, to his political project. Well,
especially if he's riding a populist wave and then he goes and then something brokered happens.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So Jordan, we've been pretty bullish on Eby on this show for a long time, and but he is running at about 38 or 40 points, which may or may not be enough to win right this moment, but isn't enough to win if the right does consolidate in British Columbia. So what has been driving Eby's numbers down from the mid 40s to the high 30s?
Well, I mean, I think that Eby faces a lot of the same headwinds that a lot of incumbent governments are facing right now, right? It's tough to be an incumbent government. And there's no question that I think in the architecture of the political fights that he's having, that Pierre Poilievre has become really that main foil for him. So some of those affordability questions I think are tough for him. BC, of course, has an incredibly difficult housing market. Some of these challenges are magnified in BC in ways that they're not in other parts of the country. So I think he's got some challenges there. But look, I absolutely think that while they shouldn't be overly comfortable, they're still exceptionally well positioned. And the question of the merger, to me, what we saw this week actually underlined some of the weakness in that entire argument. 1 + 1 does not equal 2 for this merger talk, right? And it's the question of what would happen with the BC United votes who are actually who might be federal liberals, right? Those people are not going to vote for a party that has wacko candidates who are anti-vaxxers, and they're not interested in what Rustad has to offer, and they will go back to EB. So I think that
they're all downtown, though, aren't they?
Well, not all of them. But
I don't think you can assume that that's entirely the case, right?
Okay, not entirely, but I think we can assume that it is not as simple as adding these two vote tallies together. And I think it's a mistake to make that assumption. And then the other thing I think that was an interesting error this week, and certainly the New Democrats that I talked to in BC were very happy to see, was just the obviousness of the orchestration of this like sort of forced marriage that business interests in BC are trying to do here. It was so visible. It was so awkward. And can we just have a moment for Falcon? Like, wow, like what just a brutally kind of humiliating process, right? And this week really drove home his own weakness in this ecosystem right now.
I have no idea how the guy gets out of bed in the morning.
It is rough. It is bad. And what it does allow is that an EB, and like you saw this on Thursday, so he was out.
A forced march to historical ignominy, right?
Right, and in which there's not even any silver lining for Falcon. Like he wouldn't even be in this, like they're gonna pull some random mate, right? So like it's very awkward for him. But listen, I think it has given EB also a new front, right, to attack on, because for a populist party to be seen to be involved in this kind of a backroom deal where it's not voters who might decide who's on the ballot or who they could have a choice for in the next election, that it's going to be these interests who are kind of cooking that up. Like this is just catnip.
Okay, I agree with that, Jordan. I agree with that, Jordan.
Big vulnerability.
I agree with that, Jordan. But I also have to argue that EB's position has deteriorated steadily in a couple of ways over the course of the last year that need to be. First of all, when we first started talking about BC, the NDP were just flat out fucking popular. Horgan, EB, big numbers, just flat out popular. Mm-hmm. Then a little bit less popular as every provincial government got, but their opposition was split and divided. So their 45% looked like it was going to result in a massive victory against two divided parties. Now they're dropped even further to say 40 or a little bit below, and the opposition is consolidating. I'm not saying they're going to lose. I'm not saying they're not even still in the driver's seat, but I'm saying that their position has become consistently more precarious over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I think that some of that is, as I said, issue headwinds, it's incumbency, it's some of the national factors as well, in terms of how Poilievre has set the political table so strongly there. But I think the fundamentals, the argument that I'm making is that the fundamentals remain very favorable for EB, and that the greatest threat, which would be sort of a truly united front on the sort of, let's just call it like the pro-business sort of anti-NDP side, is unlikely to materialize. I do not think that these two are going to get together. I think that this week actually showed that it's perhaps even more unlikely now than it was previously, in part because of how this was handled.
They don't have to get together. Like the whole idea of getting them together is
BC United's going to get 5% of the vote, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, and you actually, and the 5% that they get, you want them to get, because those are like liberals who don't want to vote for the NDP and will never vote for the Conservatives. And so having them park in another party is correct. But I think you were kind of saying that anyway in terms of the math of this stuff, Jordan. But I'm gonna point out the obvious as to why the NDP are having trouble, and I'm going to point out why I think they're going to continue to have trouble until they change course more than they have. Point one, carbon tax. Only, unlike the carbon tax that the magical carbon tax that Trudeau is claiming to sell, where there's rebates and all of that, there is no pretense of revenue neutrality.
Not even a toaster.
Yeah. You don't even get a solar-powered blender. No, yeah, none. You don't even get that stuff. So, like that's point one. And point two is the zombie apocalypse started, like ground zero for the zombie apocalypse that's taken over the downtown of every city in this country and smaller towns now too. I saw in Belleville there were like 12 overdoses last week. Like crazy that you're seeing this stuff in communities that size now. That is started.
That's my hometown. Let's not fucking dance on that issue. It's a little less generalized than that.
Okay, but like, look, the fact that we are having problems of that nature, like I'm not celebrating it, Scott. Yeah. I'm saying it's a real problem.
All right,
but I think this is.
But it's not because of clinics.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not because of harm reduction.
All right, we're not fighting drug policy.
I got a quick rebuttal for Kory.
You know what? Okay. Let me finish.
Okay.
Whether or not we can debate the policy around all of that, but the public opinion around those issues is not really that debatable, right? And if you're to say, why is EB in trouble right now? It's those two things. It's carbon tax and drugs. That's it.
So I want to just make a quick rebuttal to Kory, because I think that the campaign there is aware that those are vulnerabilities. And I think you saw them make a move on tweaking the decriminalization policy, and that's not accidental. I think you will see similar openness on issues around the carbon tax. They will pivot if they need to. You're also seeing EB going out with affordability measures. He's out there on auto insurance rebates. Like they are moving money in the right direction on those things. And I think that they're quite alive to that. But what they're also doing that's really important, and this is something that the federal Liberals haven't yet been able to do, but it's good to see EB doing it, is that they are honing in on a negative message that they are going to be punching away at all summer. These guys got into government before. Whichever horse you want to pick, They cut your health care, they cut your services, and they are going to do it again. So they are painting that picture. They're using EB to do it. They're going to be hammering away on that. And I think that is actually a very important piece of the puzzle for them.
Yeah, nobody's thrown a punch at Rustat yet, really. Okay, I think we're over long, so it's time for Mr. Pinsent to bring these proceedings to a conclusion.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, Scott, you got a Hey You?
Yep, my Hey You. On Sunday, the Prime Minister declared that there will be a by-election in Toronto St. Paul's. So I just want to say three quick things. One, Carolyn Bennett, I love you. What a great public servant she's been. What a terrific person. Indefatigable. Two, Leslie Church, the nominated Liberal candidate, a friend of, I think, all of us here, certainly someone that I've known quite a while, kicking around in the game, comes home, works hard, wins the nomination. Good luck. I hope you hold that riding. It should be a safe Liberal riding. And that's my third point, which is I sure as hell hope this is an uninteresting by-election, because if the Conservatives make Toronto St. Paul competitive, even in a by-election, it's not just chew your fingernails, it's chew your fingers time. So, but I'm hoping and praying and believing that Leslie will pull that out.
She has not delivered as many babies in the riding as Carolyn Bennett did.
That is true. That is true.
Kory, you got a Hey You?
Yeah, I'm going to throw a Hey You to the press gallery at Queen's Park. They do their version of the Ottawa Press Gallery dinner every year called Spring Fling. And it was actually funny. It was everything that the press gallery dinner is not. They told jokes. They made people laugh. It was actually a well organized and fun event. And so anyway, hey you to the press gallery at the legislature in Ontario. Did a great job, and perhaps you should contract your services out to your cousins in Ottawa and try to fix the press gallery dinner.
Is Premier Ford good at being self-deprecating?
I thought he was very funny. You're not supposed to talk about what happens at that event, et cetera, but.
I think it's probably his most successful mode, arguably.
He let a few zingers fly as well, and but yeah, those things are always better to make fun of yourself a little bit.
You have no permission in those things for zingers if you're not zinging yourself. You can zing others if you're zinging yourself, but you can't come up there and just throw bombs.
Yeah,
it doesn't work.
That's right. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Jordan, got a hey you?
I do. So I spent most of last week out in BC and, drank straight from the Kool-Aid. It's very good, guys. It's cold. It's fresh. Would recommend it. And so my hey you this week is actually going out to the BC NDP caucus. And I think, as we talked about in the podcast, they're doing a lot of things right now to set the table for the election, to protect what they've got and to continue to peel off voters who might be tempted away from them. And I think they're on the right track in terms of making clear what the stakes are for voters for those choices, in terms of putting money back in people's pockets, in terms of taking off the table some of the irritants that could harm EB. But my hey you is going out particularly to those MLAs who were first elected in the last election, the pandemic election, and who maybe did that without needing to do a whole lot of canvassing and fundraising. So my hey you is that it is time to get your sneakers out. It is time to load up your contact list on your phone. And friends, that is what you need to spend your summer doing. You need to go out there and do it for your life, because even though the fundamentals are good and things are looking strong, it's that kind of work that is going to make a huge difference in a lot of those seats. So don't panic, but don't be complacent. Don't be too comfortable. Get out there, talk to some folks, raise some money, and that's going to make all the difference for you.
Yeah, they're in a dogfight. They're in their toughest fight since 2017. That's for sure. Right? My hey you goes out to Minister St. Onge and all of her predecessors. I don't think anything about this government has made me more angry than the way it has approached the CBC over its tenure in office. The CBC's a hell of an important institution, plays a very, very important role, could play a much more important role. And Poilievre is determined to kill it. And as near as I can tell, the Liberals, from the appointment of Catherine Tate to everything, the lack of mandate review, the lack of any direction, have set this thing up to fail in a way that could not have been more convenient for Poilievre to kill when he gets in there. So you've struck a panel of advisors. A, it doesn't blow me away, but second of all, it's too little too late. That report will land on Poilievre's desk and get the respect it deserves. And so basically, screw all of you. You've left the CBC limping in its weakest shape into a fight it is now destined to lose. So congratulations on that front. All right. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Scott, who had to leave us to probably some family emergency, Kory and Jordan for being here. Thank you to our sponsors, presenting sponsor TELUS, our sponsor CN and Wealthsimple. All of you accursed for watching or listening to the show, and we'll be back next week with maybe a shorter, tighter show. See you then. Bye.